Light as a feather when I'm floating through, reading through the daily news, measuring the hurt within the golden rule. Centimeters of ether, I'm heating the speaker. Motivational teacher with words that burn people. Singing the headlines, line with discord. It's either genocide or the planet in uproar. Never good. The rules in paradise are never nice. The best laid plans of mice and men are never right. I'm just a vagabond with flowers for Algernon, an average Joe who knows what the fuck is going on. It's the hope of my thoughts that I travel upon. Fly like an arrow of God until I'm gone. So drifting away like a feather in air, letting my words take me away from the hurt and despair. So I'm keeping it vertical, forever elevator, riding the escalator to the something that is greater. So I'm drifting away like a feather in air, letting my soul take me away from the hurt and despair. So I'm keeping it vertical, forever elevator, riding the escalator to the something that is greater.
Taking chances, word tap dancing with wolves in the ice arena out there deep in the woods of Arizona. The sun be out, life's ironic, ain't it? Trying to be Dali when I write surreal life up painted vivid. Habitat crazy insane, watching propaganda 6 o'clock news and insane. Cultures clash, all black folk and white trash. They rebel in the cyberspace and might crash. Dash to millennium, a million miles are running. At the speed of now, bound no return gunning. Rambo, now gun hold, child gunning. Ambo, plow 2 times loud, stunning. Stunning when they hit ya, lift you off the earth like, hey yo, take you right back to earth. And niggas wonder why, they might wonder why this shit might happen, but it does. It go
Drifting away like a feather in air, letting my words take me away from the hurt and despair. So I'm keeping it vertical, forever elevator, riding the escalator to the something that is greater. So I'm drifting away like a feather in air, letting my soul take me away from the hurt and despair. So I'm keeping it vertical, forever elevator, riding the escalator to the something that is greater. Treat you better.
What is going on, everybody, on this Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening here in New York City? Hope everybody is doing well from the Bronx lockdown. My name is Billy Ray Valentine, and this is the Infinite Fringe. I appreciate everybody coming to hang out with me today. Hope everybody is doing well over here in New York. Actually, it's 7 o'clock, right? So what happens here, I don't know if it happens around where you guys are, but what happens here is everybody comes out and starts banging on pots or honking their horns. So if you guys hear something, that's probably what it is at 7 o'clock, in appreciation for the first responders and the people in the front lines, quote unquote. And however you feel about this pandemic, plandemic, fake-demic, whatever you think it is, these people that are normally that are at the hospitals and that have to work there, you know, they whether you subscribe to the severity of the pandemic or not, a lot of these people do, and they're still going out there and doing this, and that should be, you know, recognized to a certain degree. And I know I'm going to get a bunch of, but there's people doing, dances and putting them on YouTube, and the nurses, listen, man, what are you going to say? What are you going to say to that? You know, but there are people out there, you know, that are going out and that are well-intentioned. So I think it's a nice thing that people do. I mean, it's kind of annoying when you're trying to record a radio show, but other than that, I think it's a good deal. So if you hear that, just wanted to let you know that's what's going on. It happens every time at 7 p.m. Here in New York City. And I hear around the world probably as well. How are all of you? I have some guests here with me today. Well, actually, one of them's not a guest. He's a house guest. He comes around whenever he wants and crashes on the Infinite Fringe couch. It's my friend and yours, Mr. John Brisson is here. How are you?
How's everybody doing out there in the TFR radio audience? I am John Brisson from We Read the Documents, and tonight me and Billy Ray Valentine are going to speak with one of my most favorite researchers of all, Recluse from BisonView.com.
You know, that's my job, John. I was supposed to do that. You beat me to the punch. You know, I can't, I'll never get to intro Recluse for the first time ever again, you know. You robbed me of a moment.
Well, I mean, I'm just going to say I'm really glad to be here. Thank you so much, John, for inviting me here. And Billy, I mean, thanks for having me on. This is great. And hopefully I can do well here from West by God, Virginia.
Well, Recluse, thank you for joining us, man. I really appreciate you. John hooked it up. I've been listening to what you do for a little bit now. You know, you've been around doing your thing. And, the name is fantastic, by the way. Recluse. I wish I would have thought of it myself, and I would have beaten you to it because I like the name quite a bit. Now, you've been doing your thing. You have a podcast, and I want you to talk about that. But you also have a brand new book that is out right now for purchase. You can find it on Amazon, and Recluse will fill us in on anywhere else you can find it. Strange Tales of the Parapolitical. Congratulations on the release of your book, brother, and tell us a little bit about it.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, it's very exciting. It was originally pitched to me by my co-author, Frank Zero, and it was going to be, roughly based around how trauma has been used to reorient society, with an emphasis on the concept of the shock doctrine that was developed by Naomi Klein during the last decade. And, after kind of getting started, wanted to take on a life of its own. I kind of saw Colonia Dignidad as a natural starting ground because Klein had covered Chile so much in the shock doctrine itself. But, from there, kind of got into the Mellon family, got into private military companies and all kinds of other crazy avenues of research.
Sorry about that. I was muted up and I tried to bust out of it and I wasn't able to. My apologies. Also, I want to warn people and let them know that I am having internet issues. So if you hear a lag, it's probably it. I'm sorry. I can't do much about that. I'm happy that you went ahead and wrote this thing. And I'm happy that you're doing the work that you're doing. You're exposing a lot of things that most people aren't familiar with. I think it's cropping up to the surface now. You see bubbles of it. You see more people talking about things like this, but you do some deep dives on some of this stuff, and we're going to get into the right and what's pushing the right in the direction that they're in. We can talk about the left all day, and the alternative media does a whole bunch on that, and destroying the left, but they don't really get into the right and all these other things that you've exposed in your book and in your work. So I want to do a little bit of that. Let me get Brisson in here real quick. Brisson, what do you got to say?
It's someone, me and Recluse, working together to expose what Josh termed was the secret right, the hidden right, whether it's the American Security Council, which Recluse has done a lot of research on, wrote many blogs about the ASC on Vice of View, or my modern research at the Council for National Policy, or Josh doing a lot of the legwork back in the late 2000s, or even the more mysterious Lost Raquel, the Bilderberg of the secret right. Recluse has been writing blog after blog after blog exposing this. For how long has this been now? Almost a decade, Recluse, at this point?
Yeah, I've been blogging for about a decade. I think I got into Le Cercle around like 2013, 2014 or something thereabouts. But just nobody was really covering those kind of topics back then except for the Institute for the Study of Covert Politics and Globalization. And I guess David Teacher, though, the book that he wrote on Le Cercle back in the early 90s it's pretty much still banned. I guess he finally had to publish it for free on the internet.
Rogue Agents, right? Is the name?
Yeah, Rogue Agents, the great Rogue Agents. That's a highly recommended text. If you're looking for a good read during this pandemic.
So question number one, right, which is the most obvious one. Why do you think this is so suppressed? Right? I mean, in the era of conspiracy and the internet, everything's come out, at least we would think, right? You log on and to the internet, you could find just about any video on YouTube back in the day, on Google videos, everything. And the Council on Foreign Relations and the Bilderberg Group and the Bohemian Grove were covered heavily due to Alex Jones, and a few others that pushed it, and we are all very well versed on that, at least the 101, most of the alternative community, but not this stuff. And you talked about that book. I'm not familiar with it, but it was banned and it's still banned. Why isn't this stuff covered as heavily as the other stuff?
Well, if you really want to get down to it, essentially because modern conspiracy culture is largely itself a creation of the U.S. intelligence community, and that really goes back to the organization that Brisson just mentioned, the American Security Council.
Talk to us a little about that.
Well, it was formed in the mid-1950s. Originally, it was kind of an alliance between the FBI and a lot of military intelligence types and what have you. And it essentially was started to kind of carry on the process of blacklisting. Of course, you'd had the McCarthy witch hunts a little earlier. McCarthy had crashed and burned essentially for a variety of reasons. So this stuff had to go underground, and the ASC was one of the groups that took up this practice. Most of its corporate sponsors were almost entirely defense contractors and that type of thing. And, they just compiled massive amounts of dossiers on American citizens. At their peak, probably in the early 70s, I mean, they reputedly had close to 4 million dossiers on individual Americans. So effectively, if you were going to work for any kind of a defense contractor during much of the Cold War, you would have had to be vetted by the ASC. They probably would have had files on you that the company in question trying to hire you would have requested, even to get through the early stages of the process. So just, that alone gave them a tremendous amount of power. But on top of that, they had clear ties to a lot of people that were involved on Project Artichoke on the one hand, and then later MK Ultra. And then later you see, Psy-war officers like Colonel Michael Aquino cropping up in this organization by the 1980s. So you had that kind of agenda going in. And then, as I was alluding to earlier, you had this alliance, with groups like the John Birch Society, the Liberty Lobby, where there was a lot of overlap in the membership with. And this is where, pretty much all of your modern conspiracy culture comes from. All of the anti-UN, anti-IRS, Federal Reserve, anti-Rockefeller tropes that we're all so familiar with, the anti-CFR ones. They almost all originate with the Birchers. A lot of the anti-Semitic, anti-Israeli stuff goes back to the Liberty Lobby. And then you have the kind of more militant Christian identity stuff with the Minutemen and these kind of early militia groups, which was also aligned with the American Security Council. And it wasn't even just that. On the flip side of the coin, they had a lot of ties to the early UFO field as well. There was a tremendous amount of overlap with NICAP, which was the first, major civilian organization to investigate UFOs in the ASC. You had guys like General Curtis LeMay and Barry Goldwater, who really created the mythos behind, Hangar 18 and so on and so forth. You had guys like Bob Lazar that were connected to American Security Council luminaries like Edward Teller. So, really, when you look at a lot of these alternative communities, both the UFO and New Agey type stuff, and a lot of the, what I kind of think of as the conspiratorial right, all the stuff with Alex Jones and William Cooper, it almost all goes back to the ASC, this shadowy, network with its ties to the U.S. intelligence community and specifically, MK Ultra, Artichoke, that type of thing. It's all very insidious, to put it mildly.
Wow, that was a lot of info right there. But why do you think it was done? Why give rise to conspiracy culture in the way that we recognize it right now? And just feed one particular, at least one side of the coin from what it looks like. And correct me if I'm wrong, Recluse. It just looks like one side of the coin was covered and there's a whole nother side that no one seems to know about. And this is by design. But why would they even go as far as to create this culture? What they gain from it?
Well, there are a few reasons for that. On the one hand, like I kind of alluded to earlier, the ASC, most of its financial support came from major defense contractors and not the banking sector. And that kind of went into just the general change in the American overworld in, the post-World War II years. In a sense, the kind of traditional conspiracy theories are correct that the bankers had really dominated, though never controlled, but dominated the country from roughly the end of the Civil War up to the Second World War. Okay. But then essentially the national security state became enshrined, and it had a profound effect on the country. Pretty much all of the financial centers in the country, by the end of the Second World War, they're centered in New York and Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago, Detroit. These are the great financial and industrial capitals of the country. In the post-war years, a lot of this wealth is transferred to the southern rim, to the west, and so forth. So now you start seeing Houston, San Francisco, LA, a lot of places like that emerging as major power centers. And with it came the military and the military-industrial conflict or complex, rather, Freudian slip on my part. But, so I mean, anyway, now, these organizations have just tremendous amount of money, more than enough to rival the bankers. And they want to say in the direction that the country's going in, with this wealth, they want the power that comes with it. So on the one hand, you're trying to kind of out your rivals, accuse them of, many cases, your own crimes and so on and so forth. And then there's also, I just think, the issue of trying to do limited hangouts and so on and so forth. I mean, they had to have known that a lot of this stuff was going to come out eventually. So, you try to control the narrative through the conspiracy culture. I mean, a good example of that would be JFK. Of course, we have what Peter Dale Scott referred to as the Phase 1 story. Oswald is just a lone nut and there's nothing to see in it. And then you have the Phase 2 story that the ASC was big in disseminating, which is that Oswald was actually a communist agent, and it was the Soviets that was behind all of this and so on. So that kind of murkies and muddies the water and so forth, which further confuses legitimate researchers into the matter. And this just seems like it's been done over and over again. I mean, the MJ-12 documents, for instance, would be a good example of something that's just ravaged this kind of alternative research community for decades now. So, I mean, there's also that matter as well. You give people a bunch of red herrings and false leads, and nothing really gets accomplished.
That's Majestic 12 that you were referring to, right?
Yes, sir.
The MJ-12. Okay, listen, I got a couple more questions. There's a question in the chat that I want to get to. I do want to ask you about Bill Cooper. You mentioned him as a part of this, and I would like to know your thoughts on him and how he was connected, besides the John Birch Society, which is what I suspect is going to come out of this. But anyway, Brisson, jump in here, man.
Yeah, I mean, Recluse he's spot on with everything that he'd mentioned from my own research. That the secret right wants to control the conspiracy culture to make it almost like a limited hangout. When Alex Jones discusses the Iran Contra affair, for example, he talks about Colonel Oliver North, but only briefly. He leaves out a lot of the funding for the Iran Contra affair came out of the Council for National Policy meetings, members of the CNP. A lot of the funding for it came from that. So they don't discuss the hidden history of Iran Contra affair outside of and even frame it now how it goes a step further that Alex Jones frames Rex 84 now as being a good thing. It was it wasn't for the protesters of a Latin American civil war. It was for the globalists were going to destabilize Latin America and was going to put the refugees in there to send them back. He paints Oliver North as a good guy now. So there's limited hangout levels to all of this of how it progresses. Because, eventually, back in the day, at least Alex Jones would say Oliver North was a crook, and that Reagan was a crook and Bush was a crook. George H.W. Bush. Well, now it's none of them were. Or maybe George H.W. Bush, maybe he was the one, and Reagan was actually a good guy, and George H.W. Bush was working with the CFR to confuse all these people. I mean, that's what you end up having. You just have limited hangouts, and no one discuss or at least attempts to try to within the what I call the Truth or Industrial Complex, which is run by the Council for National Policy and the John Birch Society in modern times, in Russia too as well. They don't give you the full map or even try to come close to it. The same with where Recluse was mentioning about the JFK assassination. Of course, you're never going to hear from the right-wing Truth or Industrial Complex that the Nelson Bunker Hunt, the Hunt family was very much involved in the John Birch Society, were very much involved in the assassination of JFK. The Hunt brothers may have helped fund it, as well as they were putting up the wanted for treason posters in Dallas right before the assassination of JFK. And also Officer J.D. Tippit was the head of the John Birch Society in Dallas, Texas. So they don't tell you any of that stuff. They're going to leave all that stuff out. Why? Because they don't want you. All the researchers into the JFK assassination, majority of them, not all of them, they're going to leave that part out because it circles back to the John Birch Society, the secret right, being involved in the assassination of JFK. They don't want you to know about it.
Wow. All right, Recluse. Piggyback on that, right? And then we have, I want to know about Mr. Cooper, right? Behold the Pale Horse. I want you to tell me about that. And also somebody in the chat wanted me to ask you about Project Montauk and how that fits into this entire thing. So if you have any thoughts
Project
on that.
Monarch.
Right. Sorry about that.
Monarch or Montauk?
Monarch.
There's two.
Monarch. Sorry,
Monarch.
that was my fault.
Okay.
Yeah, I have very bad eye vision. But regardless of that, take them in parts and do what you will. Go ahead, sir.
Well, yeah, John, it can't be that the hunts were that bad. William Cooper himself said in Behold a Pale Horse that they were, patriotically trying to cover the world silver market so they could bring back legitimate currency for us. So,
that was Alex Jones too, as well. Alex Jones mimicked the same thing. Imagine that, huh?
Yeah. It's not like Alex Jones stole his whole shtick from, William Cooper or anything like that. That would be preposterous. Okay, so, Mr. Cooper, his connections to all this are really quite bizarre, which I suppose isn't that surprising, but it kind of runs through a really strange organization known as the Sovereign Order of St. John. The SOSJ claimed to be the legitimate Knights of Malta through the Russian line of succession. They had ended up under Tsar Peter's protection at the end of the 18th century after they lost Malta. They'd gone underground in the 19th century and somehow had immigrated to the United States in the early 20th and started setting up their base of operations to come out in the open in the 1950s, which was utterly bogus. The actual longtime head was a guy called Charles Pichel, a Nazi collaborator during the Second World War, a guy implicated in drug trafficking and a host of other curious activities. Anyway, he sets up this mysterious group in the mid-1950s. He gets an enormous amount of former military men and very senior ones. I think there were over half a dozen former admirals, over half a dozen generals from the U.S. Army and the Marine Corps. Really major guys. There was MacArthur's former head of intelligence, General Charles Willoughby. There was General Bonner Fellers, who had been a Psy-War officer for MacArthur in the entire Pacific Theater of the Second World War. There was Colonel Philip J. Corso, who would go on to write The Day After Roswell. Another really weird guy was Cleve Baxter, a former Army interrogation and CIA interrogation specialist. I'm in possession of Mr. Baxter's personal papers, and I can tell you from them that he was almost surely an OG Bluebird guy. That was the predecessor Operation Artichoke, and that he had gone into some really strange recruiting for the SOSJ. He tried to get members of the Scientologists involved. He was nosing around the Institute of Notic Sciences and all kinds of other crazy stuff. And this is just bizarre because the Order of St. John had close ties to Christian identity sects, Christian dominionists, and really militant types. Effectively, in my research, as far as I can tell, the SOSJ was in a lot of ways kind of the American version of Propaganda Due, the Italian Masonic Lodge that effectively seems to have been running the Gladio stuff there. The SOSJ did something similar in the United States with these, Christian identity zealots, which were very much the American wing of Gladio, if you will. But they also had all these weird ties to the UFO community and Scientology and just this other crazy stuff. Anyway, one of the really, really bizarre people involved with them was a guy called Delmar de Veras. He was a Chandler, believed he was in contact with extraterrestrial intelligences who had apparently crossed the galaxy to tell him psychically that Jews were in fact the most heinous personification of evil in the known universe or something to that effect. Anyway, he had kind of this quasi-cult operation. And
hey, Recluse, let me stop you right there. We'll pick this up on the other side. We only have 2 minutes left on this side. Before we go to commercial break, I want you to tell everybody about your book, where they can buy it, and tell everybody about your podcast, where they can find it, and everything else you got going on.
Okay, man.
Do that now.
All right. You can find my website at VisuV, that's VISUV, View, VIEW, it's all one word, .blogspot.com. The book is Strange Tales of the Parapolitical, Post-War Nazis, Mercenaries, and Other Secret History. It's available at Amazon, and PDF versions can be found at thefarmpodcast.store/. That's the Farm Podcast, it's all one word, .store/. And you can also check us out at the podcast, which is thefarmpodcast.com. Pretty simple on that one, at least.
Fantastic, man. John Brisson, tell them something about you. Go ahead.
Yeah, you guys can find me. We've read the documents on YouTube. We've read on Twitter. And sometimes on the Infinite Fringe with your excellent host, Billy Ray Valentine.
You are much too kind, sir. You still haven't made up for snatching my intro there, but we'll deal with that later, you and I. Okay, May 3rd, for those of you that want to hear the date, my name is Billy Ray Valentine. This is the Infinite Fringe. We got Recluse hanging and the fabulous John Brisson with us today. Going to get into some stuff most of you have probably not heard of. And that's really saying something, because I know all of you people, you get into stuff hard, especially if you're here at TFR with me right now. But I really want to dive into La Circle a little bit in the second half of the show. Everybody, follow me on Twitter at Obi-Wan-You-Know-Me, or send me an email at theinfinitefringe@gmail.com. All right, you guys take it easy. I'll see you guys on the other side. My music should be coming on any minute now, and I'm waiting for it. Where is it? Here it comes.
With a dilemma, I sit with an umbrella out my cellar, lettering quick, the medicine sip, whatever. I'm clever on some acapella shit, that's my main strength, but never been too bad as well at this getting brains thing. I think the lights dim, not the type to fight gin, and bent like psych to hit the bed and strike skins. Right then the phone ringing, but left it blowing in the night like the west wind crescent. My preference is a heavy snare, yes, instead of some soft shit, got a sweaty pair of breath mints. The stars be glowing, we spark weed holding hands in a gold be the cardio and stamina. Top physical condition when I'm kissing, switching my footwork, I cook birds chicken. She took off my cardigan, told me start again. I'm getting more bad bitches than Mad Mardigan. With no candles, R&B stanzas, or glamorous clothes, I rock no brand sandals. I'm dealing with fans, you're dealing with manholes. It's romance and more porn than Sancho. I never snuff lights and having rough nights, but I must live up to my rep, right? Touch ice, but my blood warm. Snuff any nickname. When he gets semi-drunk, it's a fuck storm. And some more couldn't hurt. Mix up love and war like porn. Rum in Pepsi, one for a skirt. Yikes, but I just wanna get done nicely. And yo, girl, your shirt's what enticed me. Yo, I'ma do it like this. Ask you if you love it, so if so, it's on. And boo, if you love his flow, it's golden, yo, it's all good. What you running under the hood?
What is going on? How's everybody doing? It's Billy Ray Valentine. This is the Infinite Fringe coming to you live from lockdown New York City and the Bronx. I hope everybody is doing well. Thank you for joining me here on the second half of the broadcast. John Brisson is here with me. Say what's up, John.
Hope everybody's doing well out there. True
All right,
Frequency
all right.
Radio audience, how you doing?
And we also have Recluse here. I'm going to let him get in and answer questions. And he had something he wanted to get off his chest on the top. And so we're going to do all of that. Let me get to the chat real quick before we do. Sophia the Bot, what is going on? We got Bammy in there. What's up, Bammy? How you doing? Spread Love 911, what is going on? Melissa Taylor, how are you? Blessings. Cold Brews, oh, hell yeah. What is going on? Liz, the Iron Maiden, greetings and blessings to you. It's always a privilege to have you in my chat. Wollongong, what is going on? John Brisson is in the chat. He is also on the show. Can you believe it? Wolfie's here. What's up, Wolfie? How you doing, man? Gemini, what is going on, Gemini? How's it going? Mark 13, what is up? Spoonman 88 is here. Lawrence is here. Kind Mind is here. Greetings and blessings to all of you. Quentin is here. I hope all of you guys are doing well. Thank you for hanging out with us on this Sunday evening. Recluse, how are you? Thank you for joining us. Say what's up.
What's up, guys? And I'm doing very well, man. Thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure, man. Thank you for coming on and dropping all this knowledge. Most things, I'm just sitting there and like, wow, I did not know that. And why haven't I? Why am I not aware of this? But you wanted to lead off with something off top. We were having a conversation during the commercial break, and you wanted to address it, or John wanted you to address it. So just go ahead and do that, and then we'll get into the question. Go ahead, bro.
Okay, well, so getting to, Bill Cooper's ties to this bizarre Sovereign Order of St. John, this Wato Knights of Malta outfit. Okay, so it was through this guy called Delmar Deveris. I was just getting into how basically he ran this UFO contactee cult thing, but one that was laced with Christian identity theology. Like I said, it was fanatically anti-Semitic and so on and so forth. So anyway, Deveris, he was one of the early guys to turn up silent weapons for quiet wars, one of the big tropes that Cooper later popularized.
Right.
They had some kind of association. I'm not sure where exactly it began, but probably in the early 80s. And Cooper was impressed to the point that he actually published one of Deveris's poems in Behold a Pale Horse. Certainly, though, they had contact for several years. Deveris, of course, was dead by the time Behold a Pale Horse came out. But Deveris, I mean, he was tied into Alexei Romanov, which is the nom de plume of Paul Gawronski or something, a defector from Polish intelligence who believed that he was the youngest son of the slain Tsar and just this other insane stuff. So Cooper was kind of tied in with all of this insanity. And I mean, successor organizations to this group continue to this day. Council on National Policy member and former head of the Joint Special Operations Command and what have you, General William J. Boykin is also a member of this, one of the successor groups of this Knights group. A lot of Christian Dominionists are in it now. So, I mean, this was the kind of underworld that Cooper was kind of tracking around in, really the most militant and weirdest, kind of subsection of the hidden right, in my opinion. So anyway, getting into Project Monarch. Okay, so I should probably start out by saying it has a basis in reality. It has a basis in reality. So that being said, based on what I can tell, it was definitely a bit of disinformation, but it has a basis in reality. I feel the need to emphasize that because I know when I start talking about how Monarch was a kind of hoax, people get really upset about that, but that is the best I have been able to uncover in my research. Actually, I was contacted a number of years ago. I've never actually told this story to anybody, but I feel I can do it now that the individual is dead. But I was contacted a number of years ago by Hank Albarelli, the great author of A Terrible Mistake, which in my opinion is the definitive account of Artichoke and MK Ultra, the author of A Secret Order. He did a phenomenal amount of research on this stuff. He did volumes and volumes of Freedom of Information Act requests. He interviewed Sidney Gottlieb and pretty much all of the other major guys. I don't think that there was a single person alive who knew this material better than Hank Albarelli. He was also a wonderful person. He always took a tremendous amount of time to respond to my requests, just a great all-around guy. When he contacted me, this was around 2013, I was pretty much a nobody then. I get this email in my inbox. I had actually just written a little bit about Monarch, and I think you've been trying to legitimize it. And the email from Hank says, you're going to piss away all of your credibility effectively if you keep going down this trail. And I was like, oh my God, Hank Albarelli told me that I had credibility essentially. But anyway, I started pressing him on this a little bit, and he revealed to me that he had tracked down the guy who had started the Monarch, tropes, the first one to report upon it and what have you. And he had gotten this guy to admit that he had fabricated it. I had looked into this. I think I had identified the individual, but Hank was pretty coy with some of this stuff, I think, to protect his own, disclosure agreements. Never really confirmed or denied my suspicion of the guy, so I'm not going to say his name, but I feel pretty confident that what Hank told me was true in this case. And I've always, like I said before, I always found him to be a incredibly stand-up guy, very forthright. The other things that he has told me, I've been able to confirm, to my satisfaction. So I think that he was definitely being truthful with me in this case as well. And, just in the context of what we've been talking about, conspiracy theories as a weaponization of, a kind of psychological warfare tool, it really fits, much the same way with the Majestic 12 documents. Monarch is another thing that has just absolutely ravaged conspiracy circles for years now. And again, I want to emphasize, I'm not trying to say that that doesn't have a basis in reality, that there's not legitimacy to these elite pedophile networks and things like that. I mean, that's something that, Le Cercle certainly proves beyond a doubt. But, Monarch was another thing, I think, that was a red herring to point you in, a lot of different and, frankly, misleading directions ultimately. That's how a lot of this really sophisticated disinformation works. I mean, it has a basis in reality. It tells you factual stuff, but it puts a certain spin on it that is going to totally send you off base and, into a direction that will not challenge any real or will not threaten any really major revelations.
Wow, man. Thanks for telling the story here for one. Bammy, I hope you're satisfied with that answer. If you have anything else, make sure you let me know. Brisson, let me let you get in here before we get into La Cercle.
No, I mean, I got nothing else to add to that. I'm glad you told that story, Recluse. Very interesting. Very interesting.
Right. Agreed. 100. Let's talk about La Cercle, the most secret society there is on the world, unless there's something else that's more secret than that and none of us know. Listen, I had no idea what this was until Brisson told me. Zero. Like, not even an inkling that this existed. And I've been, marching around in these muddy waters that we call conspiracy theory for quite some time now, right? And I've never even heard of it up until Brisson put me on, and then I started hearing it, and I hear a couple of other people talk about it, but you get into it heavy, Give us a slight overview of what this is, no one really knows, so I want you to give us the 101 for dummies on this, and then
Okay.
we'll get in just a little bit deeper. I want to dip my toe into the pond just a little bit. Go ahead.
Well, it had its origins in the mid 1950s, and it actually kind of began as an offshoot of the Bilderberg group, specifically between some of the French and German partners. And it was essentially trying to get, rapprochement between France and Germany after the whole, Nazi invasion occupation thing, which, it kind of left a bad taste in the French mouth, so to speak. But anyway, they were able to manage that. And, it seems like that it essentially transformed into kind of a counterbalance to the Protestant, Anglo-American, UK American access, essentially. That's one of the big things that defines Le Cercle and differentiates it between the Bilderberg group. The founding people in it were, all from mainland Europe, in many cases heavily Catholic countries, and they were almost all members of either Opus Dei and or the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. And this is the official Knights of Malta that I'm talking about in this case, not the Sovereign Order of St. John, which is one of the pseudo Knights of Malta. There's quite a few of them out there, and they're all really plugged into this stuff. But whatever. Okay, so this group was very, very Catholic, reactionarily so. It initially had really shunned any kind of involvement with the Anglo-American establishment. It wasn't really until 1968 that they started to admit Americans and then later the British. But really, from the 70s onward, it was dominated by the British Tories, and the most militantly imperialistic ones at that, to the point that it's pretty much been totally controlled by the British since at least the 1980s. I think every chairman since like 85 or so has been British. And certainly there's been some pretty heavyweights, most notably Lord Julian Amory, who was really the guy who created the modern private military industry and just the whole, kind of off the books, covert operations, assets, and what have you, just a pivotal figure in this kind of, stuff, to the extent that the Bank of International Commerce, when they were, essentially kind of set up to fill the gap after the CIA was cracked down in the 1970s, they were looking for a guy who could help them run, all these vast off the book assets. And they wanted Mr. Amory to be their CEO. Julian turned them down because he was trying to bring about a government with more resolve in the UK at the time. But, he did stay on as an advisor to, I guess, pass on some of his mojo to them.
Brisson, if you got anything, go ahead, man.
I mean, there's not much that we really know about La Cercle outside of rogue agents and a few membership lists being leaked out and itineraries being leaked out in the early to mid 1980s. So we really don't know really much about them. I mean, they have connections to what Recluse had said, like the original Knights of Malta, and also to Opus Dei, too, as well. They seem to be very big in current times with dealing with UKIP and as well as Brexit over there in the United Kingdom. So they seem to have a vested interest in that currently that we've been able to. There's only a handful of news stories about Lost Raquel in the modern times in the past decade. I've only been able to find about 6. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot less that we know about Lost Raquel than we know about the Bilderberg group.
Right.
And also, Recluse, wasn't Lost Raquel had ties in too as well with the Habsburgs and the Taxis families too?
Definitely. Yes, absolutely, with the Habsburg. Because there have been a couple of organizations. See, it's kind of a bit of ironic. Originally, Le Cercle was really very pro EU, and it had also sort of partly grown out of some of the groups affiliated with that, as did the Bilderberg group. And one of them, I cannot remember the name of it off the top of my hand, but it was, really dominated by the Habsburg interests. And then there was also the Pan-European Union or something like that. It also had a strong Habsburg influence. And I believe the other family you mentioned had also had some degree of involvement as well, but not quite to the extent of the Habsburgs.
Yeah, I don't think the Thurn and Taxis family did, but they were German nobility. And I read old magazines has discussed them being around this kind of nexus of Opus Dei and Lost Raquel and Knights of Malta.
Yeah, absolutely. And just in general, Le Cercle has always been very aristocratic. There's a lot of Sir this and Lord that and the Right Honorable so-and-so when you look at their ranks and roles and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, that would hardly be surprising in that context.
So in regards to their influence, right? So the Bilderberg group, their influence has been very well documented to the point that for a long time we thought the president was chosen there, right, of the United States. Like it was just a thing going around in conspiracy circles. What kind of influence does La Cercle have in modern day times? And I also want to get into a little bit of the CNP before we get up out of here. But let's talk about La Cercle's influence right now.
Well, I mean, I think its influence, especially in the United States, really, began to expand massively in the 1980s. Same thing in the UK with the rise of Thatcher and so on.
And the rise of Reagan.
Yeah, and obviously the rise of Reagan as well going into the 1980s. Of course, Bill Casey was also very close to Le Cercle. Several, were other major figures in Reagan's administration. So, it definitely...
The World Anti-Communist League.
Yes. I mean, there was a lot of overlap with that, with the American Security Council and a lot of the other, kind of hidden right groups that were big in the Reagan Revolution. So you had all of that. I mean, of course, Le Cercle, it's been, just pivotal in the international arms trafficking front. I mean, a lot, of course, with acts of terrorism. I mean, it really seems like it was a major. I mean, one of my kind of pet theories is effectively it was the kind of shadow body initially set up to run the, the stay behind networks in the various countries. Of course, one of the founders in Italy was Giulio. Was it Andrade or something like that, the longtime prime minister? I mean, he really seems to have been the major guy behind the Gladio networks for a lot of years there. The same is true of Konrad Adenauer, who was a German founder, another guy who had a lot of influence, as did another German founder, Franz Joseph Strauss. Certainly the Belgian partners that came in the late 60s, these guys were very heavily implicated in the stay behind networks there that kind of climaxed in the terror incidents of the bloody 80s and so forth. But I mean, I think for Le Cercle, the big thing was its ties to these elite pedophile networks. I really think that was where its influence just, really expanded massively after the late 60s, the early 1970s. Of course, there's a lot of evidence that they were deeply involved with the pedophile networks that were exposed by the Dutroux affair in Belgium in the 90s.
Franklin scandal.
Yes, through Casey. Yes, the Franklin scandal in the United States. And then through a lot of the British partners, the pedophile rings that were exposed there in the UK, in the recent years with the Jimmy Savile revelations. Of course, there have been rumblings of this going back to the Westminster pedophile dossier in the 80s and so forth. And I mean, these rings, certainly existed prior to Le Cercle, but I think a lot of these reactionary forces were able to penetrate them and start compiling just damning information on this stuff that was used to blackmail various governments that they were that the members existed in their host countries. I mean, a big guy, I think, in that regard would have been Brian Crozer, who eventually became a chairman of Le Cercle. I've recently uncovered evidence that he was plugged into all of the stuff that was going on with the Kincora Boys Home scandal. And I mean, you're talking about a guy like Lord Mountbatten, Prince Philip's uncle, a member of the royal family who was implicated in that. So, if these guys start getting this kind of information, you can only imagine how they could blackmail these governments. And I think that was probably an underlining factor that led to the rise of Thatcher in the UK and Reagan in the United States. And, certainly this is something that my follow-up book, A Special Relationship, is really going to go into heavily, kind of exploring the history of these sex rings and how it eventually kind of climaxed with Trump and Epstein and Brexit.
Wow, get into a little bit of Trump and Epstein. I mean, that's the obvious question coming out of this, right? Because Epstein, is the thing. Everybody gravitated towards that and started looking into that. And, he's, the Trilateral Commission, I think, Council on Foreign Relations, also very heavily tied with Harvard, and those are, Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilaterals are, in a way, I mean, like, it's two sides of the coin, right? We know all of these, right? But there is some bleed over to the CMP there, from what I understand. So what is the overall behind a Donald Trump and these secret societies like La Cercle or the CMP? Not that it's a secret society, but it's a think tank, a very, very exclusive, very, very elite think tank, very secretive. What's the tie there and all these pedophile rings, if there is any? Go ahead.
Well, I mean, in the case of Epstein, he kind of came out of this kind of nexus in the 1980s that brought together, individuals like Roy Cohn, Donald Trump's infamous, political mentor / attorney. Cohn was very much plugged into this, kind of hidden right network. Of course, he was essentially a creature of J. Edgar Hoover, who was really, in the States, the master of sexual blackmail for decades and decades. Of course, there was his famous official and confidential and official and personal files that just, I think the official and personal files were so damning that they were destroyed, at least allegedly, almost immediately after he died in 1972. But, this was the guy who had really groomed Roy Cohn going back to the 50s. There are reports of Cohn doing these kind of entrapment rings at the Plaza Hotel in New York involving, boys and that type of stuff. Cohn, of course, in addition to Hoover, he would later become involved with the Western Goals Foundation, which was a private intelligence network that was very closely aligned with the World Anti-Communist League, with the American Security Council. There was a lot of overlap in membership. And it was also tied into, I think it was the Western, I can't remember what exactly it was, but there was a sister organization in the UK that Crozer and some of his associates had set up as well. This nexus also included guys like Sir James Goldsmith, who would later become a major financial patron of Crozer. And Sir Jimmy was also really the guy who put Brexit in motion. I mean, he was the guy who had set up the UK Independent Party in the 90s. And to this day, a lot of people connected to him, like Robin Burley, his former son-in-law, are major backers of Brexit. And then, of course, Epstein, there was all the connections to the Maxwell family. Robert Maxwell was really set up by Sir Charles Hambro. He was an incredibly powerful banker and the head of the Special Operations Executive during the Second World War. Hambro essentially was the guy that gave Maxwell the money to set up Pergamon Press, which is what really put him on the map. And it also seems like this, publishing house was used for scientific espionage. Maxwell had impeccable contacts with the Soviets. All of his British backers had been tied to the Special Operations Executive, to the point that when he tried to join Labour in the 1960s, they thought that he was a plant from the Tory party because he was, like I said, essentially a creation of Hambro. So, you kind of have this nexus of guys. Hambro, some of his associates, especially Harry Sporborg, would later become big figures in Resurrected in the 70s with Julian Amory. Amory himself seems to have been involved with activities that Hambro was sponsoring on the sly during the Suez crisis. That's another thing I'm going to get into in my book. So, I mean, you have this kind of long nexus of guys, on the one hand with Maxwell in the UK and then Cohn in the US, who had this legacy in sexual blackmail operations for, in the US, this kind of far right establishment that, I really think it forged an alliance with rather, radical members of the British Tories, those associated with the Monday Club during the time of Profumo in the early 60s. And then going into the 70s, it really crystallized with Resurrected. And then also, too, you've got the whole specter of William Casey. I mean, Casey was a good friend of Roy Cohn's, had a birthday bash for Cohn that Craig J. Spence had thrown that I believe Casey was the guest of honor at. So that kind of ties into all the stuff with the Franklin scandal and what have you. So, it is really interesting in the fact that at the time, I mean, Epstein, is kind of exposed. This is a guy who clearly just, has countless amount of blackmail material on the Democratic establishment, on the so closely aligned scientific community and so forth. So, if Epstein is a continuation of what Cohn is doing, what potentially guys like Robert Maxwell and Brian Crozer were doing in the UK, this means that, I mean, a lot of the potential opposition to Trump is compromised. Trump himself is, of course, aligned with that as well. But I mean, whether or not, he was just another part of the ring or whether or not he was in upper management is certainly debatable. But, I mean, almost anybody, though, at this point that the Democrats could put forward to challenge Trump, either politically or in the case of Bill Gates, publicly, is somehow tied into this stuff with Epstein. So, I mean, it's just sort of Damocles really hanging over the whole, quote unquote liberal establishment.
All right, Recluse, let me get in here, man. A lot of great information. Thank you for coming on and giving us that. We're going to have you back so we can flesh this out a little more. Profumo
Absolutely.
is something we can do an entire episode on. We didn't get to Gladio. I want to hit all of that stuff up at some point. It was certainly a pleasure. Tell everybody where they can find you. We don't have too much time left. Go ahead, man.
Thank you very much for having me on. You can find me at my blog, which is Visup View. That's VISUPVIEW. It's all one word, .blogspot.com. The book is Strange Tales of the Parapolitical, Post-War Nazis, Mercenaries, and Other Secret History. It is available at Amazon and also at our official store. That is the farmpodcast.store/, and I'm at the Farm Podcast. That's thefarmpodcast.com.
Beautiful. It's Billy Ray Valentine, The Infinite Fringe. See you guys next week.
Packing the packages, the war order coming disastrous. I'm getting bottles of water in matches cause it's hazardous. Immaculate hate and Montagues versus the capitalist. Rooming in generations and nations are going at it. I'm on the front lines of these perilous times. Confusion bonds of minds of world leaders. We need a sign. A ray of hope through this dark cloud of injustice. Motherfuck this city of gold that the foreman is lusted. Jewel encrusted greed fiends apocalypse. Can't you see the blips on the radar? Missile hits overconfident. War strategists became the catalyst. Angry capitalists. The stock market's bastard. Gotta get it ready, my body is so steady. Heart heavy from living so long in these last days. Crusades of self, gotta selling ourselves short. Gotta abort lifestyles that end in something. We let the mic breathe, life to dime breeze. In need we feed words that breed hope, maneuver past the greed. Indeed, we made the eagle fly. We made freedom cry by watching Jim try deceiving the eye. Fucking alibi, we was there on the balcony. A shots blare, my vision was scarred, but we still had something for the people, y'all. Do you remember when Martin had a dream and Bobby had a regiment? It's evident the struggle's on. My thoughts are settling, I gotta play the part. Ain't no other role, I'm better at words and better than revolutionary medicine. I took one pill and the shit was on ever since. I'm trying to keep an open mind. In the wilderness, I hold a sign. Wisdom is war and it's scoping my older minds. Put me on to wisdom priceless. The fight opposite the whirlwind till you're lifeless. Look, the game plans to defeat the man. Fuck trying to beat the man. I navigate seas, enter freedom land. Get at me people if you're trying to soothe the pain.
But if not, move over, cause I'm trying to see change for
It's
real.
the raven that never came back to the ark, hanging out with the viper at the garden and eating that anger the god. Show who you really are, moon eclipsing the star. Precise one, reborn, scorned by human flaws. So who is this saying that money is bliss? Your logic remiss, you and the devil about to kiss, I dismiss. Motherfuckers leading our brothers through streets and gutters, overflowing from tears for my mothers that fall as they witness slow death of their children. Why they alive and realize they fell victim to American nightmare, daring to dream things ain't never what they seem. Can we ever redeem? Hold on to old principles and still remain sensible. Analog art became digital.